Emotions Matter, brought to you by emaw.com. That's EMAWW.com, your solution for emotional intelligence. Thank you for joining us on another episode of the Emotions Matter podcast. Our guest is Shaun Farrugia. Shaun has over 20 years' experience in software development and technical team management. He also takes on the role of agile coach, ensuring an alignment of the product lifecycle through more effective collaboration. He's also a part of Honey, the improv troupe in New York, and they travel around the country, which adds a dynamic dimension to other areas of his professional life. Welcome, Shaun. It's great to have you with us.
Great to be here, John.
Tell you what, let's start with your long and successful career in application development and team management. Walk our listeners through the metamorphosis of this pretty significant part of your life.
Sure. I started just as a developer back in the Visual Basic 4 days. I was always enamored with programming since I was a kid. My first computer was a Texas Instruments 99.4A. So software development and programming has always been a part of my life since then, since the time when you could type in programs from a book that you would buy from a physical bookstore. And really fell in love with it. Really, I'm lucky to have that, as a part of my life, like knowing what I want to do. When I was a developer, I was young, I was naive. I really didn't know a lot about people, very sheltered in a lot of aspects of life. And as I went through my 20s and started to look at my own levels of personal responsibility and professional responsibility and how I wanted to increase my capacity for that responsibility, I started to learn skills and started to interact with people in different ways. So rather than just sort of not take risks and kind of stay comfortable, I started getting uncomfortable and doing new things. I've always had a degree of initiative that was always like, I'll take that on, and I'll be the one to take responsibility for that in healthy and some unhealthy ways too. And I think really that quality of taking initiative is what drew me into doing team management, because I was one who would step forward with ideas and implement those ideas and sort of became somebody that was in a leadership position, not necessarily a management position. And it took me a long time to develop skills to be a manager and to be a better leader as well. So I think it was like it doesn't feel natural because it was always a desire to want to do that. But there were a lot of organic ways I had to grow those skills.
So, Shaun, what really influenced your life as a whole? What were some of the driving factors that really moved you into your emotional awareness, your management style, what was the driving motivations for you?
Yeah. I mean, aside from learning to do improvised comedy and getting into recovery and working with groups like that, there were some really great books that I had read that are still important to me and have that have influenced me. One of them was Becoming a Technical Leader by Gerald Weinberg. It's a pretty popular book, and it's a book that forces you to take a look at yourself and take a look at the people in your life and really learn how to understand as opposed to react. He does a great job teaching you and showing you how to understand. Joel Spolsky wrote some great books on management and hiring. He has such a funny tone. It's so nice to hear him talk. He has such a nice rhythm and a nice pattern. I know that Joel is one of the most amazing technologists and business people out there, but I think I got to give a big shout out to his voice and his rhythm because it's great. There's another John Lopp, he tweets under Rands. He's another amazing manager that sat down and wrote a book on managing. Any of his books are amazing too. So those I think were the three biggest authors that have influenced me. And finding a good mentor. I've had some really good managers in my career that have looked out for me, even if I didn't like them at the time, I kind of look back and I go, oh man, they knew so much and they were trying to teach me so much. So I try to draw on them and their experience as much as possible too.
Terrific. That's great insight. Thank you so much for sharing those authors and those books that influenced your life.
Yeah.
Terrific. Well, on a completely opposite side of the coin, what got you started doing improv?
I was in Detroit in 1999, and my friend worked for Amtrak. And I think I don't remember how old I was, maybe 20, 21. And the Amtrak train runs from Detroit to Chicago. Mm-hmm. And we would just go hang out, and I would hop on the train with him because he worked for Amtrak. We would take it to Chicago, and I would, as part of hanging out, just like a couple of guys doing dumb stuff, drinking, we ended up at the Second City, the famed Second City in Chicago. They have a free improv show at night, and I went there and saw their improv show, and I couldn't believe that they were making it up at the time, that it was so funny and so amazing to watch. And I fast forward a few years later, it was a Second City in Detroit, and at the time I was really going through some pretty difficult change and complex change in my life. I'd quit drinking a few years before that. I was entering a lot of therapy and really working on a lot of emotional growth and dealing with some really painful stuff that happened. And as part of that transformation, my therapist at the time, one of them was doing art therapy. And I was writing poems, and I was really having it was really nice to express myself. And I remembered that the Second City had improv classes, and I started taking improv classes in 2004 after kind of dragging my feet on it. Found a new way to express myself in that way. So it was in combination with some personal growth and it was never really like a professional growth thing. I just thought it looked like a really good time, and I wanted to be a part of that. And I was always kind of cracking jokes, and I like to laugh, and it seemed like a good fit. And I've stuck with it ever since.
That's terrific. Shaun, you manage people in, let's call it, a pretty complex environment of application and product development. Over your career, what are your observations regarding how people on your teams are motivated? For example, was fear a factor in the past versus today, maybe desire in today's world?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Over time, I'm not sure I could say if I've observed change in people in general, because my own perspective has changed over time. I could say for motivation, some people are motivated by, I've worked with a wide variety of age groups. So there are some people who are motivated by coming in, having a peaceful environment to work on, and they want to be able to do a good job. And other people might be motivated by intensity of change and learning. So everybody does have a different motivation, and finding out what that person's motivation is key to communicating with them. And it is a difficult thing to determine and understand what people's motivations are, because it requires you to step back and listen and, remove all the biases that you might bring into a listening situation, and be open to an answer that you might not have thought of. So the more I can see the differences in people, the better off I can sort of fit a solution or fit a way of communicating to them.
Let me ask you something. When you're building a team and you're setting up a framework of that team, do you have a formula that you use maybe for using emotion as a driving factor? What is the formula that you use as you're building and setting up a team for the best amount of collaboration between the team?
There are a couple of very formulaic things that I will do. Some of them don't have anything to do with emotion. One of the first things I do is I try to create a single source of truth. So whether that's a board, like a Jira board that everybody can see, and I tend to work with distributed teams, so I have to work with the distributed tool. So whether it's creating a Jira board or a Redmine board that shows where all the work is and where it's in progress. So Kanban is extremely powerful as like a framework. And I really like bringing in these ideas of like ideas from Lean. So Leans create maximum value and really try to avoid creating waste. And I think people, when they're engaged professionally, will react emotionally to things like waste or things like I'm not being used properly. If you can express and show the team these types of tools, which I think are newer generation types of tools, or at least are newer generation within the software development world, like Kanban and Lean, that goes a long way to giving people not only what we should be working on, but how we should be working together. Like we should be aware of how the handoff of work is. We should be aware of, let's try to avoid doing a handoff if we can. Can we work on things together? And so once you have these frameworks in place, you can start to do these types of things with the team, like break down the silos and break down any sort of reluctance to work with other people. Reluctance to break that comfortable, like I'll just communicate through the ticket and I won't pick up the phone. But you do need to have these frameworks in place, I think, at first to be able to then start to fix some of the issues that come up. So I guess another way of looking at it would be the frameworks will lead you to the things that you need to do with the team. I think outside of that's one way to approach it. I think some other managers might be completely holistic and say, I'm going to avoid the framework and just come up with something that fits this team, which is a super valid way to go as well. A manager might be experienced enough just to know exactly how the team needs to work together.
You use a technical basis of your formula. Is there a point where the technology drives more of a personal or an interpersonal emotional relationship between the team members?
Oh, yeah. One example of that is we have these tools that will take a screenshot of the design and it'll compare it to they'll compare them to each other, and it'll tell you if there's something different. And that way you can see if are we close enough to the design and if there's an issue. So that can create a lot of anxiety for people to, quote, get it right and not mess up when you have these types of things in there. So that's technology driving emotion right there. Okay, if this thing breaks, I'm going to know immediately, and I have to be as precise as possible. And if it doesn't, then I need to fix it. So if I can create an environment that allows for that type of interface to happen or that type of dynamic to happen without creating anxiety, that's what I'm going to aim for. Because the anxiety, I think, is helpful to a degree, but I don't think it's the right way I don't think it's a really productive way to be driving towards success in any way. I think it's helpful, but I don't think it's the right way. So I'll let people know, hey, these are tools that are there to help. They're just there to support you and help you. And once people can hear that, they can free up, and they're not going to fear using that technology in the future.
So it sounds like you use some positive emotional influence to get your teams to work together. And that sort of speaks to emotional intelligence on your part. So what are your thoughts on emotional intelligence and the role that it plays in successful management practices?
My girlfriend gave me a book, which was an emotional intelligence book. This might have been 4 years ago, three years ago maybe. And it was Emotional Intelligence 2.0, and I read through and I thought, this is such a great articulation of awareness, of personal awareness, social awareness, personal and social behavior. And the biggest takeaway that I have from it is, having empathy and understanding that when you're working with a team, that this is a team made up of individuals and they all have their own universe. They're all living in their own world. Just like I'm living in my world right now, and you're in your world right now, and you have priorities in your life. I think once you have that, you can speak to those, whatever those values are and whatever those priorities are in a person's life, and help the team understand each other and help move the team forward. It doesn't have to be, I'm not talking about coddling people, but it's more of if this person has just had a kid, mm-hmm. and their first kid, they're going to be a little checked out, and that's fine.
Right.
And so I'm not going to, it would be silly for me as a manager to rely on them for certain things for the next month. I need to give that person's going to have their space. Mm-hmm. To me, that's I have an awareness of where they're at. had I just sort of expected them to be exactly how they were 6 months ago when they were, they weren't like a parent yet, I would probably fail because they wouldn't be able to, they're not as productive as they were 6 months ago. So being aware of that and having the ability to be flexible for different situations is important. Now, some people do that naturally. It didn't come to me naturally. I was very low on the emotional intelligence scale. And that's the sort of effort when I was talking earlier about becoming a better manager. That's the part that didn't come naturally to me, was being aware of my tone of voice when I was working with teams, being aware of interrupting people when people were speaking, and my idea of what respect was completely misshaped. So it took a lot of effort and a lot of studying. And I would say if people are getting feedback about how they come off as a leader, if they're coming off, if you're getting feedback as you're too rough or you're yelling at people, and if your response to that is, well, they should work harder, then I think that's a huge clue for you. I'd say go out and really study, learn about emotional intelligence, go to therapy. You don't have to have like a mental health issue for therapy to be beneficial. Even 3 to 4 sessions can just give you a better perspective and help you become a better leader, because you won't be, projecting onto other people what you think they should be doing. You'll be able to see them for who they are. So it's huge. Those are just a random collection of thoughts on emotional intelligence. It's big.
Well, it sounds like you've certainly captured the requirement for it to be a good leader. One of the pieces that I wanted to ask you about was if you could give our listeners some perspective for your experience in coaching teams that consist of multiple generations. You've got millennials, you've got Gen Xers, Gen Yers, et cetera, the baby boomers. I don't know how old you are, but I would assume from your perspective in technical software development, there's a difference in what motivates people emotionally in the different generations, or maybe there's not. What have you noticed in your career?
So just piggybacking on that last answer, so I had to change from I had a very command and control style of managing teams where it was like my way or the highway, really. And I did need to mature and grow up. And part of that maturation process was being able to say, I'm where I'm at the moment. Everybody is where they're at the moment, and it's okay, and meet them where they are, rather than expect them to, jump up to some abstract, ambiguous level that's only in your head, Shaun. Only you know what you're expecting. You're not able to articulate it. So there was a lot of growth I had to do there. When I started dealing with, so age or generation, I realized is different than maturity. So you can have somebody who is in their 50s and they may not be as mature because they're still dealing with some stuff. Even though they've got perspective and experience, they might not be as mature as somebody who's 25. They might not be able to, or they might not have the right skills. They can't handle criticism. Okay, so that's one thing I've noticed, where it's age doesn't matter as much as I thought it did when I was in my early 20s. So, and that's not a bad thing. I work with some people, they're in their 50s and they're just having a blast. And you'd think, and I think I hope I am that young at heart at that age. So, that's amazing. So there's one thing is age, you have to take age out of the equation and meet people where they're at emotionally. And I think after you meet people where they're at emotionally, you can, so just go back to listening. If somebody who is an older programmer who's familiar with the days of COBOL and punch cards and working in a highly structured environment, enters a new environment where it's all agile and anything goes, and is there a manager? I have a scrum master, but I don't who do I report to? You need to settle people in to new environments. So being aware of where somebody came from helps, and listening to them, okay, they may feel strongly about having a business analyst, and now they're in an environment where they don't have a business analyst. So from an older generation where roles were much more defined, how can we bridge that and bring them to a more responsibility-based understanding of what's happening? So they're trying to solve a problem when somebody says something like that. I wish we had a business analyst. So try to understand what that problem is. Is it because people aren't communicating? And I think that is So that's using somebody's experience. They might not have the language to articulate it in a way that makes sense to a broader audience. But if you can help make that experience apply and make people at a broader audience understand somebody's experience, your team is going to be much better off. As opposed to like saying, oh, well, that person just wants to be in a COBOL world and just dismiss them out of hand. Mm-hmm. So really, I just really avoid dismissing people because of age, and I really take a look at their experiences and their experiences and like maturity level and where they're at.
Do you find there's different motivations with the younger generation? What have you found is the most significant motivators for the millennial generation?
I'm going to apologize to the millennial generation because of the two people that I'm going to choose to represent that entire generation. So I apologize. I'm sorry. It's not fair to do that to a generation. But so I think people want to do a good job. I think people want a good job. People definitely want to do a good job. It's the way that the good job is judged. And at times, and again, this is a huge thing that leaders and managers can do for all generations, but I think especially millennials, which is to say, show them what impact they are actually having. So somebody who's young and is like, they're talented and they're writing a bunch of code and they're writing all of these emails and communicating with the group. They may not be aware of, because of experience or because of maturity, of how they are impacting the group that they're working with. So one thing a manager and a leader can do is show them what the impact is, and not in a negative way, but in a positive way. Mm-hmm. When you're writing these emails and you write, for example, if you write an email without a greeting, this person might take that as rude. I know you're not rude, but this person is actually used to getting emails with greetings. It can be something as simple as that, and pointing out like, here's the impact that this behavior is having, and here's the impact your work is having. I think it's a big thing that millennials do need to get, and it's on the older generation to teach that. It's not on the millennials to know it. It's mm-hmm. on us. When I say us, I'm like at a weird Gen X cusp. I'm like Gen X millennial, but somebody taught me. Somebody taught me that these were things I did not know. So that's a big thing. And then second is giving younger people room to grow and room to make mistakes and express themselves in spots to where, and let them know like it's not going to be right and it's going to be fine. It doesn't have to be right. Like correctness is pretty relative, and we're going to figure it out as we go along. But don't sweat it. Mm-hmm. And so once they have that permission to fail, that starts to help, because then they can actually start to go through these processes that mature them.
Permission to fail. That's a
permission to fail.
Yeah, that's a great concept that I think a lot of people miss.
Yep.
In management. So do us a favor. Why don't you also provide some insight as to how you might use your improv skills to motivate teams, potentially through laughter?
Yeah, so we have a daily stand-up. I love having people joke around on the stand-up call. I have a team in Bosnia. English is their second language. But when we need to get on the same page, we can go and laugh and joke with each other and remind each other that, okay, we're all on the same team here. It doesn't matter that you're on the other side of the world. It doesn't matter that we have completely different cultures. We can still connect on motivation. We can still connect on laughter. And that's like the motivation, I think, just springs from that. There's no like bottle called motivation. I think motivation tends to be like a byproduct of other processes, which is like understanding, listening, and then comedy. Mm-hmm. So, and how do I use the improv skills? I think just being quick with a funny comment is helpful. But more importantly, one of the biggest improv skills is listening and sort of being real in the moment, not being absurd, not being clownish, but being actually reacting properly. And that helps you kind of call out what the reality is of a problem. So if a team is trying to solve an issue, there's multiple rabbit holes they're going down, talking about different stuff, getting lost. And it really helps to be able to come back to, here's what we're actually trying to do. So it's important to give the team that direction, because when you have 4 people even just trying to understand, there's 4 different directions that you could go in, and they're all vying to go into different directions, because that's engineering. You got to try different ideas out, but it does help to be able to like center it back on what's important. One of those improv skills is like, what's the game of the scene, which is like a pretty controversial skill, but it is, what's the game of the scene is like what's important, like what is the actual pattern here, what was what had the biggest hit emotionally, and coming back to that and making sure that we can explore that idea rather than try to fix a bike. So sometimes it's like, hey, I know we're all trying to fix this bug, but do we have this higher level problem that maybe we should talk about right now? It's a good time to talk about it. Like, would we all be okay talking about the fact that these automated test emails aren't as impactful as we'd like? Like, maybe that's the problem. And being able to bring people and guide people in that way has helped as well. So that's audience work. Like, being able to carry an audience and walk them through stuff helps with small group communication so much. It's helpful. I'd say if people haven't taken any classes, go. You don't have to be funny. You don't have to think that you're funny. You don't even, people don't have to tell you you're funny. You could be the most introverted person, which, I am a very introverted person, so I don't think that's a negative skill, but don't let yourself, don't say nah to that. If you're interested in doing it, definitely go do it. If you're in a major city, even smaller cities, there's always an improv theater that has a great community, and no matter what age you are, you can go and participate in it, and you'll have a good time, and it will enrich your life in ways that you don't even know.
Shaun, we actually have a question from one of our guest listeners, and you might be able to provide some insight to this person. It comes from David, who's he's 38 and manages a team of people that are scattered in a bunch of different countries, so globally. And he asks, his question is, no matter what I do, I don't seem to be able to easily get my global team to actively collaborate with each other. What can I do to motivate everyone to want to work together?
It's a good question, David. Well, I'd say here's some insight on it. I'd say you don't feel like you can do it easily, and I would just say that's going to be okay. I feel that's going to be because it's a difficult thing. So I don't think there's not going to be an easy problem for you to solve. So just be okay with that at first. Like, be okay with this being a challenge. It's going to take time. Be patient with it. This is not about you. You're dealing with a lot of different personalities. It's not something that you would be able to do on your own. And what I mean by that is, no matter what you set up, like, let's say, for example, you're having trouble getting people to even just talk with each other. I would say give yourself a break about having to do this in an easy way and getting everybody to do it, and just work with two people and experiment with them. Like, see how you can get them to talk to each other. When you say work together, I'd say, in my mind, that's like, I guess they might not be communicating, or they aren't picking up the phone to talk, or they're just not working with empathy. I would just start with two people. Don't worry about trying to get everybody to do it. And going back to what I initially said about take the pressure off yourself, David. A lot of the work is just going to get done by the team itself, looking at other people on the team and watching them communicate and watching them improve, and that's going to increase their desire to improve. So it's not going to be something that you do or you're going to have like this major effect on. You're going to have to be sneaky about it. And I think a really great way to do that is just pick two people, make it easier on yourself, and then take another two people and try it with them. And you'll see the change happen, again, in ways that you wouldn't even imagine, in ways that you couldn't. It's just like an improv class. Mm-hmm. You have no idea how enriching it's going to be. So I take the pressure off yourself and just kind of don't worry about making everybody do it. Just start small.
That's a great response. Shaun, let me ask you just a follow-up to that. Since you manage global teams, is there do you find there's different motivations for people, say, if you're managing a group in Spain or Italy or, France or, the UK, do you find different motivations, different requirements to get those other countries, the cultures in other countries obviously are going to have different responses to different motivations and collaboration. What do you find is the differences, and how do you work through cultural differences in motivation and managing people?
So I'll again apologize to everybody in Europe for the 5 people that I'm going to choose to reflect everybody in Europe for my answer here. So sorry for the rest of everybody, but there's 5 people that I'm going to choose. So the motivations, there doesn't seem to me to be different motivations, at least with the engineering team of computer programmers that I'm working with, that's any different than their American counterparts. Their challenges, though, are going to be different. They might not have English as a first language, and now they have, and then they're communicating with Americans who only have English as a language in many cases. So motivation wise, there's already, if you've already made the effort to learn another language and start to communicate around the world with it, you're sort of already have this motivation in place. You're already going to be, I think, a motivated person. There seems to be a little bit more, at least I've worked with a lot of Eastern Europeans, a little more of not a problem. It's fine. There doesn't seem to be a ton of stress coming from my particular team that I'm working with. And I'm like, all right, I guess I have to turn the challenges up for them. And they never respond with a higher stress level, or they never escalate. And I would see an American team tend to escalate emotionally for, if there's something breaking down. I've tended to see some American teams like, oh, who can we blame first? It's like, and who knows? I don't know if that's cultural or not, but the lack of escalation at times, when I say I mean emotional escalation, I see like a more mature approach sometimes coming from the offshore team. And who knows? Maybe that's because they don't have to physically be in the building, so that they don't have to physically like see the stress level, and that helps because they can respond much more dispassionately, I think. Mm-hmm. Again, I don't want to draw. There's only 5 people, so I apologize to everybody in Europe who, especially in Italy and Malta, my home country of Malta, who are completely ruled by their emotions. We are very fiery. So yeah, that's the stuff I've seen is when working with those distributed teams.
Well, that's some pretty good insight, I'll have to say. So I tell you what, give our listeners some insight as to what you're looking to accomplish next, or if there's something new you're looking to explore, and follow that up with, where can our listeners connect with you? Yeah.
So the project I'm working on right now at a sort of micro level is I'm writing a book about being on an improv team and all the things that when you're on a comedy team, like a sketch team, for the first time, what are the things that you need to know that they don't teach you in class? Like, how do you communicate with each other? How do people figure out who your coach is going to be? How do you guys make decisions around what practice space to pick? What do you do when you're not on a team? Like, how do you find things like that? Because it's important information, and it's kind of like past, you learn it from people just by talking to them. But I want to create just a one volume where people can just read and know that. And at a higher level, just really exploring consistency, like this idea of consistency of like, to write the book, I have to actually write, 500 words a day. Okay, what is it going to take for me to write 500 words a day? And exploring that as a personal growth opportunity to bring some more discipline into my life. I've really been enjoying some Stoic books. Ryan Holiday just wrote a book called Ego is the Enemy. Really love that book. And if you were like, hey, I don't need that emotional intelligence book because I'm fine, go read Ego is the Enemy, because I think you might need that book. That's a really great book to read. And where you can find me is I'm on a couple places. I'm on Instagram under Bug Tank, Bugtank. I take pictures of interesting doors that I see. So if you want to break and you just want to take a look through some doors, you can see me there. I'm on Twitter as ho 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 with zeros, and my improv team is on Twitter at Honey Improv. We're also on Facebook at Honey Improv. We do shows regularly in New York City, so you can come see some really, really funny comedy at those places.
Great. So catching up with you in New York and other places across the country. Terrific. So, Shaun, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us and sharing your insights with the Emotions Matter podcast audience. We really, really appreciate you coming on board with us.
Thanks a ton, John. This was great. Had a good time.
This is John, and I look forward to being with you again on another episode of the Emotions Matter podcast.